All right, welcome back to our daily read aloud, The Wild Robot. Last time we read, Roz was working her way around the island, meeting some other characters. She hatched her little egg, okay? And she met up with a goose named Loudwing. And Loudwing helped her a little bit. First of all, she said, oh, being a mother's easy. Remember, then she listed like 85 things Roz would need to do. And Roz is just looking at her like, what? Okay, now where did the goose say they would need to live? Because Roz wanted to put her in a nest in a tree. Zoe?
On the ground.
On the ground. Geese live on the ground, and she said, you need to feed it. And so Roz is getting little clumps of grass and little bugs and trying to feed her. But the problem, they need something to live in that's on the ground, and so Loudwing said, go to the beavers. Okay, the beavers might know what to do. So we are in chapter 29, the beavers. Eric? Oh, yes. At the very end, he said, by the way, he said, if he gives you trouble, remind him that he owes me a favor. So Loudwing's being pretty helpful. Okay. The beavers. Every day, the beavers swam along their dam, inspecting and repairing it. So beavers. I grew up in a swamp. We had beavers in my swamp. So what they do, we had a stream, like a creek that went through our swamp. And beavers like to have a big pond. And they are so smart, they know how to make a pond out of a creek. So they will chew trees down, make them fall, drag them to where they want, and they basically build it's like the side of a pool where the water is. So the water can't flow through, and they build up this big pond area. And that is where they build their hut, and that's where they raise their babies, and it's a pretty cool process. So in my life, I have walked across beaver dams. You can walk on them. They're very sturdy. And some of them I have seen in New York when I hike. I will stand up so friends at home you can kind of see. They were as tall as my head. So there was a beaver dam with all sticks and mud that went up to about here. On the other side of the sticks was like a big pond. So you're just hoping walking past it that the dam doesn't break, right? Angie.
I wonder why beavers build dams and it stops the water. They make their dams really big.
Well, you could do an experiment sometime. If you had running water, like running through a little stream, if you piled a bunch of rocks and sticks, would you change the flow of the water?
Yeah.
So they kind of use that type of an idea to build up a little pond. So that is how beavers adapt to living in streams. All right. So they swim along their dam, inspecting and repairing it. The wall of wood and mud allowed only a trickle of water to pass through. Well, that was a vocab word, right? A small amount of running water? A trickle? And it had turned a narrow stream into a wide pond that many animals now called home. As Roz and Brightbill walked around the pond, they passed hundreds of chewed-up tree stumps, proof that the beavers needed a constant supply of wood. And this gave Roz an idea. The robot swung her flattened hand, and the sounds of chopping wood echoed across the water. They were soon replaced by the sounds of footsteps and shaking leaves, as the robot carefully walked along the beaver dam with a gosling on her shoulder and a freshly cut tree in her hands. The beavers floated beside their lodge and stared at the bizarre sight with open mouths until Mr. Beaver slapped his broad tail on the water, which meant, stop right there. That has also happened to me. I was on the shore just kind of watching the water, and a beaver swam up, and it just kept pacing right in front of me in the water.
What do they look like?
We'll have to look at a picture later, but they do have a big flat tail. They're big. And it kept slapping his tail in the water, and it's very loud. So that was a warning to my husband and I, you are too close. It probably had babies somewhere. So we left. We didn't want to bother the beaver too bad. But when they slap that tail, it is very loud. So he slaps his tail, which meant stop right there. The robot stopped. Hello, beavers. My name is Roz, and this is Brightbill. Please do not be frightened. I am not dangerous. She held out the tree. I have brought you a gift. I thought perhaps you could use this in your beautiful dam. No thanks, said Mr. Beaver. I have a strict policy never to accept gifts from Don't be ridiculous, interrupted Mrs. Beaver. We can't let a perfectly good birch go to waste. Remember, those are the trees with the peely white bark. A birch tree. I'm afraid I must insist, said Mr. Beaver. Mrs. Beaver turned to her husband. Remember how you asked me to point out when you're being stubborn and rude? Well, you're being stubborn and rude. Then she turned back to Roz. Thank you, monster. If you'd be so kind as to drop the tree in the water, we'll take it from there. I am not a monster. Roz tossed the tree like a twig. I am a robot. The tree smacked against the water and sent the beavers bobbing up and down. Just then, Brightbill started peeping. "Mama, hungry!" So Roz dropped a ball of grass into the nest. "The gosling thinks you're his mother?" came a quiet voice. It was Paddler, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver's son. "His real mother is dead," said Roz, "so I have adopted him." There was a brief silence. Then Paddler looked up at Roz and said, "You're a very good robot to take care of Brightbill." Mr. Beaver sighed. Yes, that's very good of you, Roz, but I don't understand what any of this has to do with us." "Well, my son and I need a home, and Loudwing said you would help us build one." "Of course she did," Mr. Beaver muttered to himself. "Loudwing gets me out of one lousy jam, and I spend the rest of my days doing her favors." Mrs. Beaver glared at her husband. "Sorry," he said, realizing he was being stubborn and rude again. "Stay right there, Roz. We need to have a family meeting." The three beavers slipped under the water, and a moment later, their muffled voices could be heard inside the lodge. The lodge is the part that sticks up like a half circle with all the sticks. So that's where they go in from underwater, and then they can move around inside. The robot stood on the dam and patiently waited with her son. "Mama, Mama!" "Yes, Brightbill, I am trying to act like a good mother." A ripple, and Mr. Beaver's head appeared above the water. "If you bring us 4 more trees, good healthy ones, maybe I'll have time to help you with the gosling." "That is wonderful," said the robot. "We will be right back." Chapter 30, The Nest. "I've built my fair share of lodges over the years." Mr. Beaver stood at the water's edge. "But I can say But I can't say I've ever built one for a robot and a gosling. So just what exactly do you need?" "We need a lodge big enough for us both," said Roz. "It should be comfortable and safe, and it should be near the pond." "How long do you plan on living in this lodge?" "I do not know." "Well, then we better make sure it's strong and sturdy." Mr. Beaver stroked his whiskers as he thought. "Do you plan on having friends over? The missus loves to entertain guests." "I do not have any friends." "No friends? Well, you seem pretty likable for a robot. But if you want my advice, you should grow yourself a garden. Your neighbors won't be able to resist fresh herbs and berries and flowers. Just you wait and see. So we'll make sure there's a place for a garden, and we'll give your lodge some extra space for all the friends you'll be hosting." The beaver winked. "We also need to find a way to keep your lodge comfortable when it's cold outside. Our lodge is heated by our own bodies, but I think we'll have to find another way to heat yours." The beaver and the robot thought about heat for a while. The first thing that came to Roz's mind was the sun. But then she remembered the hot sparks she had felt while sliding down the mountain peak. Does anyone have a prediction what Roz could be thinking? Cadence?
Fire.
Ooh, she saw sparks, and she's got that computer brain that knows, right, that spark could probably start a fire. "I could heat our lodge with fire," she said. Mr. Beaver blinked his little eyes. "I will need to experiment," Roz continued, "but I think there is a way." "You go right ahead, Roz," said the beaver, but would you try not to burn down the entire forest?" "Do not worry, I'll be careful." "Let's move on," Mr. Beaver sighed. "The next order of business is to find a site for your lodge. The meadow across the water would be perfect, but the hares will have a fit if we try to build there. Not me." The rabbits. "I think we should clear out some trees and build right in the forest, and I know just the place." The beaver took them along the water and up to a dense section of forest that jutted into the pond. "It needs some work," said Mr. Beaver, trudging through the thick weeds, "but this ought to do the job." "Yes, this ought to do the job," said Roz in her friendliest voice. "Job," said Brightbill. Mr. Beaver was incredibly skilled at taking down trees, but even he couldn't keep up with Roz's powerful chopping hands. So he let the robot do the hard work. He pointed out the trees and shrubs that needed to go, and Roz started hacking away. By sunset, they were standing in a newly cleared site, and they had more than enough wood to build the lodge. "You did some fine work today, Roz," Mr. Beaver yawned. "I'll return in the morning, and we'll pick up right where we left off." "What would you like me to do?" said the robot. "Tonight? So you still feel like working, do you? Very good. Well, you could start by digging out these tree stumps, and you can collect all those large flat stones over there, and you can smooth down this path of dirt so we have a level place to build. That should keep you busy." The next morning, Mr. Beaver returned to find that Roz had been very busy indeed. All the tree stumps had been dug up and their holes filled in with dirt. 20 large stones had been stacked, and the ground was now perfectly level. But what most astonished Mr. Beaver was that Roz and Brightbill were huddled around a small, crackling campfire. Mr. Beaver moved his lips, but no words came out. "Well, Brightbill was cold last night," said Roz, "so I taught myself how to make a fire." But how?" "I discovered that when I strike these two stones together, they create sparks like this. I directed sparks onto dry leaves and wood until they ignited. Once I had a fire, it was easy to keep it going. And if I need to put it out, I can just add water." Mr. Beaver sat and warmed his paws. "I've never seen fire in such a neat little bundle." He stared into the flames. "I've only seen it blazing through the forest, burning everything in its path. But this is marvelous." He took another minute to enjoy the warmth. Then he and the robot got back to work. Mr. Beaver asked Roz to dig a trench here, to place large stones there, to arrange logs this way, to smear mud that way. Birds and squirrels perched in the trees and watched the new lodge take shape. It resembled the Beaver Lodge, but it was larger, a great dome of wood and mud and leaves. A simple opening in the wall served as the entrance, and the door was nothing more than a heavy stone that the robot could slide out of the way. Inside the lodge was one big round room. The arched ceiling was high enough that Roz could stand upright. So as I'm describing this, I just realized I'm having a text-to-world connection. I'm thinking about a wigwam. Do you guys think this would have been kind of like a wigwam? Yeah. A fire pit was set into the center of the floor, and a mesh of thin branches above acted as a vent. Long stones lined the interior walls like benches and were covered with thick cushions of moss. There was even a hole for storing food and water for Brightbill, which if I could go live in that house, I probably would. It sounded good to me. "You've got yourself a beautiful pond view property," said Mr. Beaver. "What are you going to name it?" "I do not understand." "Why, a beautiful lodge like this deserves a name. We call our lodge Streamcatcher." The robot's computer brain didn't take long. "The lodge is for Brightbill. Brightbill is a bird. Birds live in nests. Could we call this lodge the Nest?" "Huzzah!" squeaked the beaver. "The Nest is a fine name for the lodge." "Nest, nest!" laughed Brightbill. They stood outside the nest and admired their handiwork until Mr. Beaver's belly began to grumble. "That sound means it's time for me to go get dinner." "Thank you very much for your help," said Roz. "We could not have done this without you." "You're quite welcome," said Mr. Beaver, smiling. "For your garden, you'll want to speak with Tawny, the doe who lives over the hill." "What's a doe?" Madeline?
A female deer.
A female deer. So Tawny is the name of the deer, and he said talk to her about the garden. She'll know just what to do. And now, if you'll excuse me, I have to hurry home before Paddler eats all the best leaves. Enjoy your first night in the nest. All right, and chapter 31 is called The First Night. The stars were out. A fire was crackling in the fire pit. Roz and Brightbill were settling into their first night in their new home. "This lodge is where we will live from now on." The robot plucked her son from his little woven nest and placed him on the floor. "I hope you like it." The gosling did like it. He liked that it was big and warm and peaceful. And he liked knowing that the forest and the pond were just outside. He waddled around, peeping to himself and exploring every little corner of the lodge until it was time for bed. His mother carefully laid him on a soft cushion of moss, but he didn't want to sleep there. So she put him back in his little nest, and he didn't want to sleep there either. Brightbill looked up and said, "Mama, sit." Roz sat down. Then he said, "Mama, hold." Roz held him. The robot's body may have been hard and mechanical, but it was also strong and safe. The gosling felt loved. His eyes slowly winked closed, and he spent the whole night quietly sleeping in his mother's arms. I always like that scene. It's very sweet. Do you think Roz was kind of wondering what's going on, though? Because she doesn't know how to be a mom, right? So she's probably sitting there all night just holding them, right? Because she doesn't sleep. All right, I think we have time for probably 2 more chapters. Chapter 32, The Deer. So who are we expecting to talk to in the deer family? Emma?
The doe.
The doe, and her name is Tawny. The deer family did not run from the sound of snapping twigs and crunching leaves. They had heard all about Roz and Brightbill, and they knew there was nothing to fear. Crown Point, remember him, he's the big buck. Crown Point stood before his doe and his 3 spotted fawns, and the family watched as the robot approached with the gosling on her shoulder. "Hello, dear. My name is Roz, and this is Brightbill. We are looking for a doe named Tawny." Crown Point moved aside, and the doe silently stepped forward. "Mr. Beaver helped us build a lodge," said Roz, "and he thought you might help us to grow a garden." "Mr. Beaver helped you?" came Tawny's gentle voice. "You must have done something for the beavers." "I brought them freshly cut trees," said Roz. Tawny looked at Crown Point, and the buck slowly nodded. "I will help you grow a garden," said the doe to the robot, "if you will let my family eat from it." The robot nodded in agreement, and then she quietly led Tawny back to the nest. So do you think this is working and helping Roz make friends?
Yes.
Tawny seems to be into it. Chapter 33, The Garden. After inspecting the grounds, Tawny asked Roz to remove all the dried brambles and weeds and leaves from the garden area. She asked her burrowing friends, the moles and the groundhogs, to dig through the dirt and loosen the soil. And then she asked all the neighbors to do something rather peculiar. All right, and if you're not paying 100% attention, you're going to want to. "Please, leave your droppings around the nest. The more droppings, the richer the soil, the healthier the garden." What? Eric, why are they doing this?
Because it's actually healthier for the thing.
Yes.
My dad actually, he doesn't put poop on it, but he puts like coffee grounds on it, and it's supposed to help too.
Okay, so before I take any more hands, when you plant anything in the soil, we have pretty good soil here in Indiana, but if you use it a lot, the nutrients that are in the soil get sucked up into the plants. So after a while, you have to put nutrients back in the soil. And one good source of nutrients is waste, okay, droppings, poo. So Tawny the deer is saying we need lots of fertilizer here. So all the animals of the forest, come do your business right here, okay? Now, we don't have to use stuff like that. Like my plants inside my house, I don't put that in there. That sounds smelly and terrible. So you can buy fertilizers that have some of the same nutrients in it from the store. But if you don't put that stuff in your soil, after a while, it won't grow very good crops. Hayden?
My mom, to keep rabbits out from under our shed, she puts fox droppings or pee around the house. And not around the house, but around the shed. And we have had bunnies that help us grow flowers.
Mm-hmm. So that helps because a fox would be their predator, right? So if they think there's a predator around, they wouldn't want to be there. Liam?
That's why farm smells so bad.
Yeah, that is a good point. When you drive past a farm in the spring and you're like, whoa, like roll down the windows, get some fresh air. That's why. They're fertilizing their fields. Josiah?
Have you gotten way faster farther than I did? Because I actually stopped reading the book for, for a few months. Then came back and started over.
Okay.
And it took me forever.
Yeah, this book does kind of start slow, but once you're in, we're kind of getting into it now. It moves quickly. I got 2 more hands and I got to read on. Emma?
This is kind of like Hayden's rabbit story, but it's a little different because we have like a bunch of rabbits that live in our backyard that live like under our porch in our backyard because it's like a hole. And in like the spring, I would go out there and like put lettuce and carrots out.
So you were attracting the rabbits. Okay. Liam, last comment.
Actually, the horses and animals on the fields are actually good because when they need to use the restroom and do it on the fields, it's actually good for the field.
It is good. So, something to learn. All right. So, Tawny says, please leave your droppings around the nest. The more droppings, the richer the soil, the healthier the garden. As you can imagine, Tawny's request got everyone's attention. The place was soon crawling with woodland creatures curious to hear more about the garden project. And just like that, the robot was meeting her neighbors. The plan to help her make friends was already starting to work. There was a festive feeling around the nest that day. Animals were coming and going and chatting and laughing. After some pleasant conversation, each neighbor would choose their spot, leave their droppings, and be on their way, and always with a smile. We're happy to help, said 2 smiling weasels after finishing up their business. It was our pleasure, said a flock of smiling sparrows before they flew away. I shouldn't be much longer now, said a smiling turtle as he slowly made his contribution. As all this was going on, Roz walked around and thanked everyone. I am not capable of defecating. So that's a really fancy word for using the restroom, right? Because she doesn't eat, because she doesn't have waste. I am not capable of defecating, she explained, so your droppings are most appreciated. Once the grounds were fertilized, it was time for the plants. Tawny brought Roz and Brightbill out to the lush meadow. The robot sank her fingers into the ground and felt the spongy layer of roots below the grass. Slowly, carefully, she rolled up wide strips of sod, exposing the dark, wormy soil. She carried the rolls back to the nest and spread them out to make a patchy lawn. Then she transplanted clumps of wildflowers and clovers and berries and shrubs and herbs until the nest was surrounded by a scraggly collection of plants. It's not much to look at now, said Tawny, but the grass will grow into these gaps and the flowers and bushes should perk up in a few days. I'll return soon to make sure it's all taking root. Before long, this will be a lovely wild garden. And that is where we'll stop. But our next chapter is called The Mother. All right, we'll see you friends later.